Welcome to A Spirited Life. I'm Mark,
I'm Christine.
and this week we're going to be talking about money across our lives as we were growing up and how that has shaped our impressions of money today.
Our whiskey of the week is going to be a whiskey that kind of reminds us of our early times. We'll also talk about what filled our spirit this week.
We want to live a spirited life. We're documenting our journey towards financial independence while balancing that with living in the present and enjoying our time in the journey. While we want to work towards financial independence, there's no guarantee for what tomorrow will bring. So we don't want to wait to enjoy our lives because tomorrow isn't promised. We want to share our journey to help keep ourselves intentional and accountable, and we invite you to come along with us as we work towards living a spirited life. Each episode, we like to select a whiskey that's related in some way, shape, or form to the topic for the week. Christine, tell us what our whiskey is that we've selected this week.
This week, we selected Early Times Bottled and Bond. Kind of selected it because of the theme of being young and our early experiences with money and all that. And so Early Times for our early times.
The Early Times Bottled and Bond is 100 proof, as it is a Bottled and Bond product. We also know that it's at least 4 years old, but it is estimated to be sometimes a little bit older, up to 6 to 8 years old. Originally was done by Brown-Forman and distilled and produced by Brown-Forman. They recently, within the last couple of years, sold this over to Sazerac. So all of their stocks from the Early Times releases that they had done previously in terms of all the barrels that they had associated with that were sold over. And so you'll sometimes find these with a metal cap or with a black cap. The black ones are from Brown-Forman and the ones with the metal cap are from Sazerac. Some people have said that you can sometimes get a little bit of a difference in the flavor, the blending, things like that. People have noticed some difference, but they've also found that some of the ones with the black caps aren't as good or aren't perceived to be as good as some of the ones with the metal caps. In other cases, some people say the ones with the black caps are better than the ones with the metal caps. It's probably just whenever you catch the individual blend, and it probably just depends on who did the blending that go around for that particular product. The mash bill on this is 79% corn, 11% rye, and 10% malted barley, which is not a real common mash bill, but they do use that mash bill in a couple of other products that they have, such as 1924 and King of Kentucky. So in the nose, get a little bit of honey, a little bit of vanilla. Very straightforward nose, very common, kind of a traditional sweetness that you get overall in a lot of bourbons, things like that. Not surprising with a mash bill of, almost 80% corn.
Yep.
Yeah. One other thing that I forgot to mention earlier when I was going over the stats, the nice thing about this is a $25 bottle for MSRP, and it is a 1 liter. So you get quite a bit of product overall, sometimes a little bit more than what you would get in a normal offering. And it typically for $25, the value really is there for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's get another sip.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Corn. The sweet corn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Nice corn note. Again, good spice on the mid palate. That rye coming through.
I'm really getting that honey now. I didn't get it on the nose.
Mm-hmm.
I have a nose nostril on the half that's working. I didn't get it on the nose, but I'm really getting it on the palate.
Yeah. And yeah, that does shine through. A little bit of vanilla, a little bit of honey. The spiciness does come up a little bit. You do get every proof point of that 100 proof.
Yep.
But it's not off-putting. It's not something where it's like going to drive you away.
I haven't had this in a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a good solid pour.
It is absolutely a great solid pour, especially at $25 for a liter, where, in other cases you're often paying, like $25 for a 750 mil. So you're getting 25% more for the same cost. Sometimes can be a little bit hard to find, depending, because a lot of people discovered how good this was for the price.
And the cost point, yeah.
At the price point. And so, You may or may not be able to find this depending on where you're trying to pick it up, but I would encourage most folks, if you can, give it a try if you do see it on your shelf, if you do see it available, just strictly based on the fact that it is relatively inexpensive.
And it's super approachable, even if you're not a regular bourbon drinker, like someone that's new to it that wants something a little extra, a little more flavor with it. But it's approachable. It's not going to offend you. It's a good, solid pour. I haven't had it in a while, and I'm actually quite impressed with how good it is.
Yeah, getting in on the second sip here, and again, just getting a little bit of, just a hint of medicinal cherry. And it actually started early on and is carrying through the mid palate, and then a little bit of oakiness on the finish there.
Yeah, I'm getting the oakiness. I'm not getting the mint, or I'm not getting the medicinal cherry quite like you're talking about, but I do have that oaky, sweet cherry-ish type thing. But it's what I call oaky.
Okay, yeah, and that I would say it's probably the same thing for us. So, but yeah, essentially hits kind of all the marks of a, pretty traditional bourbon, fairly standard bourbon.
Yeah.
But it really is, it has a good flavor, good depth. It's a nice, enjoyable experience overall. Again, highly recommend if you can find this in your area and you haven't had a chance to try it, give it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
So, any final thoughts on that?
Just that I'm surprised with how good it is. I haven't had it in a while. Like, I don't remember the last time I had it. So having it coming back to it, it's one of those that I forgot about how tasty it was, how good it was, how it was proofy enough that you feel it, but not too proofy where you burn everything.
Mm-hmm.
A solid flavor that kind of lingers for a little bit, but it doesn't like blow you over.
Yeah.
2 thumbs up.
So that's our quick review of Early Times Bottled in Bond. And thinking about early times, let's transition over to our early times and early experiences with money. So talk a little bit about money growing up and talk about how, what money was like, what our experience was like with money over the years when we were really young, as we got up then into, being teenagers, into high school, then even into early adulthood, and how that's shaped our impression of and how we approach money. And so, because there's a lot of things we learn throughout our lives about money, and our experiences naturally shape us to change our behaviors. And so, part of our experiences, whether it was, young or high school or early adulthood or even now, continue to shape our relationship with money and continue to shape how we approach that resource. So let's start with, what was it like for you when you, do you remember even your earliest memory of money, or what sticks out to you?
I do, and it was elementary schoolish, so I didn't have a lot of money growing up. So a lot of it sticks out for me because I did. So my earliest memories of understanding money, understanding that some people have more, some people have less, some people have a lot less, was, I remember in elementary school, because I would do a lot of, we had a lot of community and or government assistance growing up.
Yeah.
So one of them that sticks out, and it's funny because to me so I remember it comes into mind in elementary school, but it's like a mixed bag because I got to do some fun things. We did Clothe a Child. So this is back in the day, because they would random people would come to your house, pick up a kid, take you to the mall, and you go shopping and whatnot. But like you hear it
Could
right
you
there.
imagine that nowadays?
Did you hear that though? I said take you to the mall, not
Yes.
you
Not
and
you
your
and your
parents.
parents.
Now they
No.
meet. Now that everyone meets together at the mall, but
Right.
So-
But back in the day, what was happening was they would literally come. You're saying they would literally come to your house,
yeah, you've never met them before because they're volunteers and you only meet them on that day.
and they would just take you, the child, off to the store.
Yeah,
Not with mom and dad.
correct.
And
Yep.
you would then go to the mall or go to the store, and
Yep. Yeah.
and then what would happen from there? Not, yeah, go ahead.
Well, obviously, I came back every time.
Yes, that still worked out okay.
I only did it twice, then I aged out of the program. The boys did it 3 times. Yeah. So I remember there's 2 I remember. The one that I remember was like an older couple, and it really sticks out in my mind for one reason that you're gonna find out later, and it's going to explain a lot about me. So this older couple picked me up at home. You go to the mall. There's multiple stores there. Each store that's participating has like a ledger type thing.
Mhm.
And then you also have a list that the parents kind of go over, like, okay, so you need some dress clothes. You need maybe some pants. So then you don't have the children influencing you. Like, I want these sneakers, and I want these, like, shorts, and I want this bathing suit.
Right. They're giving them guidelines so they're not just
Yeah, so you
going
did have
willy-nilly.
some wiggle room.
Mm-hmm.
But so it was a guideline. So it was me, and I would go with this. It was an older-ish couple. And so I remember going to different stores, and you try stuff on, and then you're part of the program, so they kind of checked you out in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Certain stores were participated, certain stores didn't. So the way I really remember this one, it sticks out. So I was trying on a dress, and somehow a pin stuck me.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady felt so bad that she thought she got all the pins out, but I got stuck that they ended up taking me for ice cream afterwards because I felt horrible. So which is why it sticks out, because I love ice cream, and I'll take a pin in the back for some ice cream.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I knew that was something different. I none of my other friends did. I knew I was different than a lot of the people that I hung out with
Mm-hmm.
from that level.
Yeah.
But it was such a fun
Mm-hmm.
moment. It was such something unique, something different, something fun that at that time in those moments, and you did it usually over the summer, like August-ish, it felt more like a privilege, like a bonus than we feel really bad for you and you can't afford your own clothing, so we're going to help you out.
Okay.
But that's how I knew, like, that's why some certain things, and like we had food stamps, and I'd ride my little bike up to the store to get some milk with the food stamps, and we had like the powdered milk and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew it was different. I knew I was using food stamps and community outreach programs, but my experiences with them at that time weren't so traumatic that I thought it was bad. It's just, I have this cool story that no one else I really know has this cool story.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. So your experience wasn't of like being an outcast or feeling shame or anything like that.
Really young in elementary schoolish,
Mhm.
no. That did change, which we'll get to, but in elementary school it didn't. It just seemed like I was picked to be part of a special program.
Yeah. To be clear, I don't want people to feel shame about using programs that are there to help you when you need them.
Mhm.
Like, I'm glad to hear that those programs were there to help support your family. I mean, your parents were divorced, you're a single mother with three kids, and taking care of you and being able to access some of those programs. It's good, I think, from my perspective, that you had such a positive experience, at least early on that way.
Yeah, and that's what, like, my divorced parents, my mom had to go back to school. She was working in childcare, which today doesn't make much money. Back in the early 80s, wasn't making much money.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it really did have more of a community feel in helping my brothers and I make sure that we had the stuff that we needed. As I get older, things changed a little bit. I had a different understanding of how things were, and things got a little tighter. But at that time, and that first real memory of understanding that what money was, in theory, like I couldn't tell you like all the details other than I could tell you like a quarter and a dime, all the stuff you learned in like elementary school. But understanding that there's this thing called money. Some people had more of it, some people had less of it. And there were different programs to help people if you really, really had less of it. It's kind of how my first real understanding of money and kind of where I fit in the general society in that I was hanging out in. So what about you? What was your real young memory of money?
Yeah, so probably some of my earliest memories with money was that my grandpa, my mom's side, whenever we would go over to visit for holidays or things like that, Grandpa would always be like, line up. And the kids knew that Grandpa was going to have a nice, crisp dollar bill for them. That was one of the things. And so Grandpa loved to have the kids line up, and then like they would go through and you would put your hand out and he would give you your dollar. And sometimes on special occasions he would give you like a $2 bill. Which was cool.
Those were the coolest ever.
Yeah, because they weren't real common. And then like, eventually it was like, a couple bucks and stuff like that. And like, but so that was a fun thing that he liked to do that, cause you see all the kids line up and get excited about it. But for me, when I was younger, my relationship with money was a lot of, I always saw it as like, a means to an end. So like I would save up and I would be saving for something in particular. And I would be targeting something in particular that I wanted to get, like a Nintendo or something like that. We grew up solidly middle class, or at least that was my impression, that we grew up middle class. Like we weren't super rich, but we weren't like, we had, you know, clothes, and mom and dad were able to provide for us. And like, they bought me tons of stuff in terms of like toys and all of those types of things. So, but for me, that was kind of my relationship. My early formation was like money essentially was a means to an end in that regard in some way, shape, or form. And so, I think that actually influenced kind of some of the way that I think about setting money targets. Oh, if I do this, then I can do that. And then if I can save up my money, then I can do these other things. Like
as you're explaining it as a means to an end or as a transaction, I'm like, oh, that explains so much. Because that's how you, like, in today, like, that's how you get really good at focusing. You set what you want, and then you work towards it.
And so I'm not sure which one influenced which, if I am just naturally that way and kind of goal oriented that way, and so then therefore that just translated into money, or if it was the experiences with money and then being able to have those tangible outcomes that were associated with that taught me that having a goal and then working towards that goal and then being able to see the results of that goal in a very tangible way was the thing that made the difference.
Helped you build a habit, nature versus nurture.
Right. And so I'm not really sure, but that is some of my earliest memories. I was highly motivated around those types of things. And often, it was like video games and stuff like that. So it was being able to get a Nintendo or being able to get, like, I still remember how much I paid for a Super Nintendo.
How much?
$211.49 with tax.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember exactly how much it was, which at the time, that was a significant amount of money, because you're talking like that was in 1990 or 1991. That is a lot, That's a lot of money. But I like scrimped and saved all of my birthday money and everything like that. And I remember I kept on asking my mom how much money I had in my bank, and I had my little ledger and everything like that to keep track of it. So I would be able to buy the Super Nintendo.
It's fun. I actually remember my first individual purchase as well. I actually still have it.
What was it?
It's that puppet dog.
Oh yeah.
I have it upstairs. It's the first thing I bought all by myself, and it has been with me through many, many, many things. It's still upstairs. Yeah,
I was gonna say, I think
that explains a lot about the two of us. I really remember buying the Super Nintendo. What did you remember buying? Little puppet dog.
Yep, absolutely.
If anyone wants to know our dynamics in life,
yep, that covers it pretty well. So then transitioning into, as you started getting a little bit older, you started getting into like maybe middle school, into high school, the teenage years. How did that change? Because like obviously there's some dynamics there that potentially changed. You started getting your first job. Talk about that.
Mine's a mix. Mine's getting older, middle school-ish, early high school-ish, and then it's like when I got my first job. So I've it's a mix between the two for me. So money was still very tight, very tight. So as I got older, I started understanding more, and being the oldest and my mom in the situation, she shared a little more with me. So I had a very good understanding of, okay, well, you have to make sure the electric bill's paid, and don't run the water too much because you got a water bill. And we have a food budget. We still had some government assistance and things like that nature, but we always had to pick, okay, well, what we have, but you can't. What also at the same time, sorry, I'm just going in the middle of this, is my mom also went from nursing school to getting a solid job. So I think in the middle of my teenage years, it was like two. It's like pre my mom getting her nursing job, pre me getting my own job. So there's like two phases in that for me. So I remember being hyper aware about bills and creditors, and we didn't have insurance for a while. So I remember like the cost of medical bills. I remember a conversation at the Y where mom's like, okay, Christine, come here. you need to be very, very careful. We do not have insurance until my job's insurance kicks in. So you cannot do anything stupid. So I remember, like, that's a one of those life events that, like, stick with you forever, that kind of changes how you view everything else. So, like, I could go on tangents for insurance and all that stuff, but because I remember being a young teenager having that conversation where I needed to be very cognizant of what I did, because I was a little crazy and I hurt myself and I did insane things. So just realizing that I had to be ultra careful, because if I ended up doing something that put me into, I had to go to the emergency room or urgent care or anything that we could not just fix at home, that added even more pressure on top of what we already had pressure for to pay the bills.
So that added the additional pressure, and I can see how that has even influenced some of our thinking today around having an emergency fund and being able to cover some of those things. I can imagine that probably changed kind of your impression about, how you approach things or how you worked on things. Tell me about that.
Well, I think just that, and just really understanding that, like, it's a fine line. Like, it went from I didn't have money, but I got to do all these awesome things, to we don't have money. There's all these serious consequences that we're already trying to dig out of a hole. And I think this is, when I look at my family's, if we talk about it later, my family's view on it, we were already starting way behind or in a hole. So just to get to even, we had to dig out of this hole. So if anything happened that wasn't expected, you didn't get out of the hole any faster. Like, it just either put you back in the hole or you just stayed in the same. Like, it just kind of added to it. So I really remember that, the insurance, and really understanding that I had to be careful because these are unexpected bills. They're not inexpensive. And on top of that, too, is understanding the cost and value of food. Because we would have times where things would be really, really tight, and it was okay. Well, we don't have enough for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So you had to choose. So you could have breakfast or lunch, but you couldn't have both. So I remember having those. And I remember that's when I learned, like, okay, if I sleep until, like, a certain time, then I won't be that hungry, so I won't feel it. But my lunch will hold me over, because then dinner will hold me over. So I learned how to, like, play that game.
Yep.
So I think it's more, I really learned how to look beyond the next hour, the next 2 hours, the next day for things that involved anything that could cost money.
Yeah. So you had to look ahead, and you had to understand, like, hey, this is essentially, without saying it, a form of budgeting.
Yeah.
And you had experiences that weren't like pen and paper, writing it down on a piece of pen and paper budgeting, but you had to do that budgeting just through the resources that you had, that you would have gotten through money, and also understood that, hey, if we do have an accident that happens or something serious that happens, that is going to have a major impact on our ability to even be able to pay all of our bills or things like that. I can see how that would, shape your outlook pretty significantly.
Yeah. So that was part of it. So that was from my understanding, from my family perspective, my mom perspective, understanding that thing. And then I was becoming a teenager. So I was becoming very cognizant of the kids around me. Kids were becoming a little more cognizant of, I didn't have the coolest clothes. Like, we did. It's so funny because, again, going through, like, we did a lot of thrift store shopping because that's what we had to do. So, and that was fine. But then as I got older, and then the kids all of a sudden, like, oh, you're wearing, like, hand-me-downs, or, like, all these things are a mess. So it became, when I was younger, I knew I was different financially in certain ways or whatever. But as I became, like, that young teenager, it became very obvious, and it became very, I don't want to say detrimental, but it became very self-conscious. It became more of, like, an issue than, oh, we're just different.
You could feel it.
Yes. Well, yeah. I could feel it, and kids sometimes aren't very nice.
Yeah, and they, admittedly, a lot of kids don't realize that they're being cruel or
you don't know.
nasty and things like that. But in the moment, I'm sure that it did not feel great in terms of the feeling that you got from the way the others treated you. Yeah,
which then, in a way, that put a chip on my shoulder, which then we could also talk about later, about how that chip influenced and changed what I did later on.
Yeah.
So that's my do you want to talk your pre-teens? Like, I have a before and after in my teenage.
Yeah, I don't have that much, like, in my preteens, other than my mom started to go back to work. One, because this was actually probably early on when I was pretty young too. I was a latchkey kid, and mom started to go back to work because it gave us more flexibility and more opportunities. And because my parents were looking at the future situation and saying, hey, we want to set the kids up for success. And they explained that to us. They said, hey, mom's going back to work so that it gives us more opportunities and so that you're able to do more and we can go on vacations and we can, you know, in the long term, potentially pay for school and everything like that. And I, you know, I'm not surprised that she wanted to get back into the workforce too, because, you know, she was, and don't get me wrong, I am so appreciative of the fact that I had a stay-at-home mom for a long time that way because she was able to be there and raise me and everything like that. But she probably wanted to have some adult interaction and
make her own money
make
and
her
have
own money. And so, you know, I think I was probably a little disappointed initially when I was a kid, and she could probably tell me. And she watches these. So
she does. Hi, Mom.
She'll probably, yeah, hi, Mom. You can tell me if I did this or not. I was probably a little disappointed, but hopefully I was pretty good about it.
I could see you being a little pouty.
Yeah, I'm sure I was a little pouty. But like I also, you know, I can have an appreciation of that now because my parents wanted to be able to give us opportunities and wanted to be able to make that investment for us. And I am so deeply appreciative of that today, that they did that. So then in my teenage years, I took my time getting a job, and it essentially had to be mom basically saying, no, you're going out and you're getting a job. Thank you, Mom, for the motivation.
Also, thank you, Mom.
So appreciate that now. And went out and got my first job I don't count my real first job because I only worked there for a day and then I messed up my ankle. So I didn't really work there too long. But I was like, oh, I'll go work at the movie theater because I love movies. And
you get free popcorn.
And you get free popcorn and you get to go see free movies if you want to and things like that. And, you know, it was hard for me to be in like normal food service. Like I had difficulty in terms of like food handling and stuff like that. So popcorn and pop and things like that and candy, that was fun. So yeah. And that's, you know, that started helping get an income and start to do budgeting and learn budgeting and getting back into, okay, now I'm making my own money and things like that. You know, Mom and Dad still obviously helped out a ton and appreciate them for all of those things that they did for us. But they did start to teach me at that point, and they helped ease me into, hey, you have to start being responsible for some of these things. You have to start providing money for those things. And I think that they did it in a very gracious way for me to be able to grow into that in terms of, you know, helping to save up some of my own money, expecting me to be working and things like that, but not necessarily expecting me to be working, you know, 4, 5, 6 days a week, those kinds of things. It did help shape the impression because again, it started to reinforce the feeling of, oh yeah, you know, if I start to save up, if I start to target some of the things that I can do, then that gives me opportunities. I can start, you know, going and hanging out with my friends. I can start, like I used to smoke, so I could buy cigarettes. I could, you know, I could go to concerts, those kinds of things. And so starting to, again, make those connections between, you know, what money gives you the ability to be able to do potentially. And that was a lot of my experience, you know, looking forward and then starting to understand budgeting a little bit in terms of what you had already had probably a lot of experience with in terms of, you know, needing to budget for the house and needing to budget for food and being able to talk about some of those things. Started to get a little bit into that, but we didn't like, that is one thing that we didn't do a lot of. I didn't get a lot into that with my parents in terms of them showing me the budgets and them walking through where our money was going and how much stuff costs and things like that.
So yours was more of like a personal budget. It was for you, things you wanted to do, if you want to clothes, if you want to go out, if you want to do all those things. So you were learning how to take care of yourself and your immediate wants.
Yes, but I was admittedly somewhat shielded from like all of the other costs of life. We did an exercise in school where we had to go through and find an apartment and find out how much that cost and find out how much money we'd be making when we got a job. This was actually a little bit earlier. But that was one of the things where you start to get a little bit of an impression, but it's not as real until
The consequences are right
the
there.
consequences are really right there, which came later on. So, like, what was that as you got into the teenage years? If you got into your working years, what was that like for you?
So when I was able to get my own job, 16, I think it was 16 papers. So it worked well because my mom ended up getting into her career and then making her own money. So then the stress of a lot of the house payments, electric, whatever. So that was gone. I didn't have to worry about that so much. The making my own money offered me a lot of freedom. Things were still a little tight. So like if I wanted certain food, I would have to buy it myself. Basically, it was in my family. If you wanted something, you had to buy it yourself with your own money. I have a story about when my brother we didn't have air conditioning, and my brother wanted air conditioning desperately. So he had his job, went and got air conditioning, little window thing, put in his window, shut the door, put like a sock underneath there. Like that air conditioning was not leaving his room, but it was very much, and that's what, it helped me understand that if I want something, like things aren't just given to me.
Yeah.
So getting my first job was great. I met you. I did work as much as a teenager was allowed to legally work. But it did open up, like I'd have my car, so I knew I had to pay my car. Anything I wanted or anything that I had that was mine, I had to be able to take care of myself. So I had to buy my own car, pay for insurance, pay for gas, pay for maintenance. And then I had the freedom, like I had a very bad feeling or bad taste in my mouth about thrift store clothing because of the experiences growing up. So then I could buy my own like new clothing. So I went on I am not buying second hand clothing for like years. I've then since changed my mind on that. But I was able to have more control over the things that were happening to me. Yeah. Which then helped me ease some of that social pressure type feeling. But at the same time, it did open up, like, so was my money. I had my own stuff. I could choose to do what I wanted to do. My mom was very much, though, once you turned 18, you had to pay rent. So I had to pay rent. And it was, I remember her coming to us with a little index card. And all of our house utilities, house payment, insurance was all broken down by force. So it was my mom and my two brothers and myself. So I was responsible for minus the house payment. The house payment was not in there, but 1/4 of the heating, 1/4 of the food budget, 1/4 of the water. So it sucked at the time, and I hated every moment of it, and I didn't understand why. I understand why we had to do it because money was tight. I also understand why, like, you're making me do this. My friends don't have to do this. But it really did set me up to be an adult, to move out with not hypothetical, like, ooh, here's my apartment. Ooh, do I have these bills? Like, I knew firsthand what that stuff was and how you could manage it and how you could change things up and, like, budget it. And, like, okay, so I don't have that much money. So, like, we'll drop the heat a little bit or things like that to help balance it all out. So that's kind of my later teenage years.
And I know you've talked with me about this before, so I would just bring it up about you always had a desire to be able to be self-sufficient.
Yes.
And to be able to be self-reliant that way.
Yes.
And I think that what you just described actually is probably exemplary of some of that, about some of the things that influence that desire for you to have some of that independence and self-reliance of, I always need to be able to pay my bills. I always need to take care of myself, be able to take care of myself.
It's a mix. My family is very much self-reliant. Like, there's no, it's funny, I was looking as we were going through our notes and I'm like wondering, like, okay, did your family talk about this when you were growing up? Did you talk about this? Money, even to this day, money in my family is like up there with like religion and politics. No one talks about it. You don't talk about other people's things. You don't, like, it's just, even someone that's close to you, it's still like, you don't talk. My brothers and I will have a conversation. The three of us will like walk and talk around the edges of it, not coming right out and talking about it. But it's just not something that we will directly be like, yeah, here's my budget, or here's this, or here's what. Like, it's such something that was never talked about. And then being a very self-sufficient family, like, we are very much, don't help us, we'll take care of our things. And then also with the chip on my shoulder, like, yeah, I struggled this way and I struggled that way, which then gave me a chip on my shoulder, which meant, well, now I'm just going to do it all,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to take care of things and forget you all. I don't need any of you. I got my own stuff.
Yeah. And I can see how those types of influences, not only for you, but actually for a lot of folks, because a lot of folks can be like what you described, where money can sometimes be taboo for people to talk about. And I don't know this, but like maybe that's a part of why we didn't talk about it in my family, like overtly, or they didn't go through things with me. Honestly, it probably wasn't as much that as it was I wasn't as interested or didn't show the interest in it as a kid.
Yeah, and
I was too busy playing my video games.
And that's what I'm kind of curious as to your perspective growing up. Like, I understand, I see mine. Our things are, as much as we have areas that are same, we have areas that are very different.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a really good understanding of budgeting and planning and saving and all that other stuff. Like, was there a time when like you sat down with your dad, or like you saw, like, did you learn any of it growing up, like through either explicit teaching or just watching them model it, or being aware of what they were doing? Like, did they do this is how old we are, did they balance their checkbooks at the table? Like, just kind of how you picked up on that type of things to set yourself up in good habits.
Dad did the balancing of the checkbook in the office. Dad would always have time in his office to like go through and do all the bills and everything like that, because you did that back in the day when you were writing checks, right, to make sure everything was covered. He had his little organizer with all the bills.
Gotta make sure they're clear too. Don't assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, he would spend time doing that. As I got closer to college, and we started talking about, hey, you're going to be going away. You're going to need to start managing some of these things. Dad did sit down with me and did go through some of those things, and did spend some time actually saying like, hey, you're going to need a budget. You're going to need to understand like the outflows of your money and how much money you have and what you can spend on. And again, I am so thankful because they helped me out tremendously with school and being able to help me transition into that part of it, as far as for paying for school and things like that, and helping me learn like, yeah, you're going to have money to budget. You're going to have to figure out how to, like, you're going to, like, when you're in the dorms, you're going to have a certain number of meals, right? And you figure out what you're actually going to use and those types of things, and you figure out what you want to eat and like how much you're actually eating in your meals, stuff like that. So learn to do that, and then learn how to adjust some of that based on what I was like, hey, this is really expensive and I'm not eating all of these meals. Let's dial that back.
So you had like a basic proactive kind of experience with budgeting and planning, and not so much you were thrown into college. You had the idea that it was there, but you were more reactive. So you had a proactive kind of poke at you instead of it all being 100% reactive and learning how to manage it in the moment.
Oh yeah. And again, I can't thank mom and dad enough for how they helped me make that transition very smoothly and very easily. And I've heard that this is actually, something that happens more often with the families who are more comfortable talking about money. And the families who do have more of that is that they're not shy about talking about money and budgeting, and that it's a resource and that you don't just mess around with it and things like that. And I think that was a little bit in my family. It sounds like it wasn't in your family.
Well, I think the difference too is that money was a source of stress, anxiety. Like, money wasn't something that, okay, we get money in, here's these bills that we pay. If you do this right, you could do it this way. Money was it was more of a reactive. Crap, we have all these bills. Crap, we have all this. Don't answer the telephone. Like, it was more of a very high anxious, very stress, very tightrope walking situation. So I can see why people don't want to talk about it. If it's I feel like it was always an underlayer of, it's always there. Like, you're just waiting for the wrong phone call because it's before caller ID or something, and you picked it up at the wrong time, and it was, someone wanting your money. Like, it wasn't. It was more high energy, high stress than actually like, okay, I have this inflow. And I'm sure like they wanted to do things for their children, my parents, or things like that. They wanted to do for us, but they couldn't do it. So then you're like, oh great, I can't even, I'm not able to get clothes for my children. Like, that just adds another negative aspect to it.
Absolutely.
So why would you go? So I can see that. Why would you want to keep talking about something that literally at times can make you sick.
Mm-hmm. Physically sick because you're
worrying
worrying.
and stressing, and it's such a horrible thing. So yeah, you're not really going to talk about it. I wouldn't want to talk about it if it was something that was always so, for the most part, like a negative thing. Where instead, like even if you just had enough to cover your bills and you had a little extra, like having that understanding where it's not like, don't open the mail, I don't know what that bill is going to be. Like I could see the difference and why some would want to talk about it and some wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I just find it funny too, the lingering effects of not talking about money.
Sure.
Based on that anxiety, because we're not in that position anymore.
Right.
But we're still like, don't talk about it.
Right. But it's still, and I think the term that some people use is you have these scripts in your head that run, that you tell yourself, the stories that you tell yourself. Oftentimes they're called money scripts.
Yeah.
And you have the story that you tell yourself in those money scripts about your relationship with money and things like that. And that's probably an example of that continuing to play out.
Well, and I think too, an understanding what it's like to not have money and that feeling of judgment or that negative vibe. Like, I don't want to talk to someone else because if someone else is struggling or someone else, like, I don't want money to be a thing that you think I'm judging you on, or it's a thing that like I'm going to look differently at you. So that's why I don't even talk money with people, because it's like, okay, that's not going to change anything about how I think about you or how I interact with you. But I guess maybe I still have that there because it was something that affected how people thought of me or interacted with me.
Oh yeah.
So now I carry it like money. Like I don't care what your story is like. So we don't talk about it. Where you, I mean, I'm sure things were tight. I'm not suggesting that you guys were like rolling in it.
Mm-hmm.
But you did have it where you had the ability to have those proactive conversations without it being a stressful trigger.
Oh yeah. And I know mom and dad have, they ran the numbers and worked very hard to be able to give us the opportunities that they did.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that they worried about because they wanted to see us be successful in that way. And they knew that if they could give us that opportunity to, get a good start and give us essentially a wonderful gift in terms of not having debt or not having as much debt, and getting a better start that way, because as you were talking about earlier, then you're not feeling like you're digging out of the hole for forever. And that explains why a lot of people feel the way that they do these days when they have these mounds of college debt and those types of things. And you feel like, okay, when am I ever going to get out of this? I can understand that, that feeling that people could have in terms of that weight on their shoulders of like, okay, am I ever going to get out of this?
That's going to link to something about why I did some things in my early adulthood too, and understanding what it's like being in that hole and that viewpoint. But so your parents really did work hard. I know your mom talked about like,
oh, absolutely,
coupon clipping and all these things that they did to make sure that they did everything possible to help set you all up with as little debt going forward into adulthood.
Yeah. And we still took lots of vacations and things like that, but Dad loved a good deal and we loved to stay at Days Inn, because Days Inn was like, hey, it's clean and they're well maintained and like they're safe and everything like that. And they were always a really good value. Like that was like his go-to. Like I need somewhere that's clean, where we can sleep, that's going to be safe, and that doesn't cost too much money. And so like that was the joke amongst the family was we always stayed at Days Inn because it hit all of that.
It was
criteria.
all that. It was a consistent.
Yeah. It was a consistent experience that you knew was going to hit on all of those things. So, but yeah, like that was one of the things. Like, and we did a lot of driving trips. Like we did a lot of like driving trips to like the shore and stuff like that. We went to like Ocean City, Maryland, and North Carolina and stuff like that, and down to Florida, and all those types of things. And we did some of the other stuff too. Like we talked about in the camping episode. We went camping and we did family trips and those kinds of things. And they were able to give us all of those opportunities too. And I know that they worked very hard to give us all those experiences. And and I'm sure that your parents probably worked as hard as they could to be able to give you the best experience that they were able to in the situation that they were in. Yeah. That's, I think, I won't say all parents, because I think that there are some parents who don't inherently, but I think there are, most parents, that's what they try to do. They try to do the best that they can, but that can have a pretty significant weight
Mm-hmm.
on them if they feel like they're struggling or not able to do that. And so that can have a lasting impact. So let's talk about that impression into early adulthood. Let's talk about how that has impacted even how we started together. We got married pretty young.
Yep.
And so most of our adult lives, we've been together.
We've been together.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about how that's impacted like us in terms of our young adulthood and even in today.
So as you know, because you were there, my young adulthood, I didn't save so much. I was very adamant about kind of keeping some finances separate.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, making sure that I tried to help cover the bills. Like we have bills in different names because I wanted to also make sure that I built up my credit.
Right.
But we did like a percentage breakdown of who got bills based on how much you made, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
We should do a budgeting episode.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit.
Oh, sorry,
we can go in and we can actually do
blah, 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 and I'm like, that's
Yeah.
kind of in depth with how we kind of go about our thing.
Yeah. And I know we've talked about budgeting a little
Yeah.
bit and like being able to set up our budget and those types
Yeah.
of things, but maybe we'll actually do an in-depth budget where we go through and we walk through.
Okay. So we did our own individual way of budgeting. Like your paycheck was your paycheck, my paycheck was my paycheck. You had your bills, I had my bills.
Yep.
They went together. Like we just covered it all.
Mm-hmm.
But I also had several more cars than you did. by several, I mean probably at least double the amount of cars that you had.
So in my adult life, I have had 3 cars.
So adult life starts at 18?
Adult life starts at when I bought my
Your first Civic?
silver Civic.
Okay, because I just want to know when I need to start counting my cars.
Yeah, I had 2 cars before that, but those were not.
Yeah.
I'm counting adulthood cars. So
Okay.
there was my silver Civic, there was my Honda Accord, and there was now my blue Civic. Have you had 6?
The tan Corolla, was that first? No, I had the Cavalier.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had the tan Corolla,
Okay.
the 4-door Corolla.
Yep.
Then I had the Monte Carlo.
Yep.
Then I had the black Corolla.
Yep.
Then I had the Mini.
Yep.
Then I had the Civic.
Yep.
Now I have the Passport.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is, and that's the difference, is I went from very much, I mean, I paid my bills. I never went into debt. I never had collections. Everything was covered.
Sure.
But other than the Monte Carlo, which really annoyed me, so I traded in underwater and I just added it to the really cheap Corolla.
Mm-hmm.
Once I paid off a car, whee, it's time to get a new car.
Yeah, you fell into the classic trap that a lot of people fall into, where it's like, oh, okay, I've paid off this car,
I get a new one.
I can go get a new car, right?
Yeah.
And rather than necessarily, and yeah, you didn't always do it like right away,
But it wasn't. It was close after.
Yeah,
I was always looking for the next new car.
Mm-hmm.
Which now I've had 2 cars paid off. Like in this Passport, I'm not. Once it's paid off, that's not more of a. I'm just getting it to burn through it. Now it's more intentional and more mindful. Why I went from the Civic to the Passport.
Right. That gives you capability. You bought that because
For camping, for hauling, for gardening.
Right.
It was an investment.
Right. That is an investment in capability that you didn't have before, and
Yes.
it made sense for you to be able to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. Where before you would just buy a car because
Whee!
yeah.
That's on the Mini, the Monte Carlo. Woo! Like the Corollas were my fallback when all the other cars made me mad. I'm like, oh, I'll just go get
I'm just gonna go get a
just gonna
good
use
reliable.
Corolla.
Yeah. Could you imagine if you would have kept one of those Corollas and how long it might have ran and
Yeah.
yeah.
Hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
Hindsight and understand. Well, and I look into that, like, and I was very adamant I would not have secondhand clothes.
Mm-hmm.
I always had to buy new clothes. And these are all the holdovers that I had growing up. As I was noting for this, I realized a lot of the habits I had were holdovers from growing up. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't doing secondhand clothes. I don't care. I could finally afford my own clothes, and they were going to be brand new to me, brand new clothes. Not even just new to me, brand new clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Then I started understanding, like, oh no, the thrift store's not so bad. It is funny. The last time I went to the thrift store though, and I walked in and I had those smells, and I'm like, it like triggered something in me because that's all I ever had growing up was thrift store clothes, and I'm just like,
Yeah, scent memory.
oh, but. And then I look at it, I'm like, oh no, I'm really enjoying the clothes I got from the thrift store. I'm starting to understand now that the petty middle school, high school bantering over brand new clothes are the coolest it fashion
Right.
it's kind of worthless because
Mhm.
now I want to spend my money elsewhere.
Yeah.
But a lot of my holdovers, the new cars, I was kind of looking at that like, so I should be understanding like money was tight. Like I know what it's like not to have money, but then I would go spend it frivolously.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why? And like I'm looking, I'm like, why? I'm like, well, because like the habit was my family, we were always in the hole, and like the closer you got to the hole, you like it took forever to get like it was just like this momentous thing to just try to get to even ground. So I think a lot of times it got to the point where it's like I can't play by the same rules as everybody else because they're already ahead of me. So now, as long as I pay my bills, yeah, maybe I should best, maybe I should, whatever. Now I'm gonna do the things that I want to do for myself instead of always having to do for this. You're supposed to do like everyone else. I'm like, well, everyone else is like 100 feet ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not going to catch up, I might as well get the cars that I want. I might as well go do these things that's going to bring me joy.
Yeah.
In the short term, which is a hole that you get into and a mindset you get into, but you realize, and with your help and an understanding and kind of stepping away from getting a new car every time I paid off a car, I can get out of that hole and I could take little steps to set myself up that become bigger chunks later on in life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my young adult-ish thing. So yours?
Mine's similar, but in a different way and not quite as expensive. In that I talked about like I love video games, and so early on, like, and this will date me a little bit, when we used to go have LAN parties, it was fun to be able to take an extra computer for somebody else who didn't have one to bring if they just showed up at the party, because then they didn't have to sit there and wait. So I literally would build extra computers and have an extra monitor because we had the money to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically getting into that, hey, this is something I want. This is something that I like to be able to do for other people, and I like to do that. And I have the means to be able to do it, so I'm going to. I knew that I needed to do saving into like 401k and also to have some extra money in reserve and things like that. But in the early years, I was not nearly as serious about it. And I mean, if I could tell anything to myself back in the early days, between 22 to 28, let's just say, right? Let's say a nice 5-6 year span there, was, man, like, you need a budget and like start saving some of your money intentionally now.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are younger and you're out there, that's my piece of advice for you, because that's what I would tell my
You'd be
younger
surprised
self.
the compounding and how much it could go without being a major impact.
Absolutely. But we still, like, I was getting the company match. I was making sure that I was investing in my 401k. I was not as diligent or disciplined about what I was investing in inside of that. I just knew I needed to put money into my 401k. Yep. And so my education in that regard, my financial literacy, was not as high as it probably should have been. And I would spend on some pretty frivolous things at times, like just buying computers or whatever. But then there were other places that I would be extremely miserly, like with my car, my Accord. I kept that.
You kept that till like
15 years.
Yeah.
I kept that car and got it to 120,000 miles. If I would have put a little bit more money into it, I probably could have kept that car for another 10 years, but the gas mileage was getting a little low on it. It was time to switch over. And that's when I got my most recent car that I will probably have for 15 years at least, because that's what I value now. I value having a good investment in a good car that gives me that capability of being able to get around when I need to without needing to feel flashy, without needing to feel like, oh, I've got something super luxurious or things like that. Like, that's another thing that my dad taught me. I need something that gets me from point A to point B.
You need a days in your life.
I need a days in my life, right? And I want it to be relatively inexpensive and reliable.
Yeah.
And then my additional stipulation is I would like to have a working radio. So,
back in the day.
That was always my additional stipulation. So,
well, speaking of flashy, like, I think about our house. So we did get a house. We rented for a few years, an apartment, and then we got a house.
We knew that it was smart to get a house as an investment because it can be a vehicle for essentially growing your for why pay money into rent where
You
it's
pay money into a
disappearing.
house, you pay it off, you have the property, you have the
Right.
land.
You've paid into something that you
Yeah.
now own.
Christine could get dogs.
Christine could get a dog, plural.
Well, and then on top of it, we were smart enough. So at the same time, I don't know, we didn't have this whole 10%. But I remember going in there to get our loan and what they were offering. This was also before the crash.
Yeah.
The amount that they were offering that we could get a loan out for was way high. We at the same time we knew we went, ooh, you're gonna give us that, but that's all we're gonna have in life.
Let's not be house poor.
Yeah.
Right. Let's not basically they wanted to give us, I think it was at the time $150,000, which for
at this
us
time,
would have been a significant portion of our budget.
Yeah.
And we both looked at that and went,
no,
we're not.
So
doing that.
so we got a house within our budget.
Yes.
Instead of
we actually worked the numbers and we said, okay, what would be reasonable?
Yeah.
For us to be able to pay on a monthly basis and things like that, that worked into our budget. And then we set our number from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of going, oh, I could get this awesome house or I want all these things. So, I mean, and this house, and now it's paid off and I love it.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things, we did not allow lifestyle creep to happen.
True.
In terms of a little bit with the cars and a little bit with the vacation. And I think you're probably talking about the whiskey. A little bit with the whiskey for sure. But there are some things that we did not allow lifestyle to creep on. We're still in the same house because our needs for the amount of space had not changed. We never had kids. It just didn't happen.
Yep.
And so therefore we didn't have more space and need more space. We really like the neighborhood we live in.
Yep.
And we really like the house for the most part, aside from a few small things.
And I was going to say, and it works out well now because every time I get an itch for something new, because I'm the one that'll be like, oh, look at that house. Oh, look at this. Oh, look at that yard. Oh, I could do this. Or I could, so we talk it out and you're like, yeah, we could do that. But then you can't do this. And you're probably going to have to work a little longer. And then we can't do that. Do you want to make those trade-offs? And I go, no. Okay, so how can I do the things with this house that could kind of give me that itch, take care of that itch that I'm feeling without trading up or getting in more debt or things that just because I want something shiny and new.
Yeah. And these are definitely some of the things that have now shaped our impression of today based on some of the earlier things that we've done. And we look at it now and we say, hey, now that we are where we are, how has that been shaped by some of the things? And it has been shaped by some of the ways we used to act, some of the things we used to do. And now realizing that there's other things that we want to emphasize and other things we'd rather do instead, right? I could get that big house, but at what cost? What am I going to have to pay? What is that going to mean? And what is that potentially as an impact for what we would need to do? And do I find that reasonable for the value I would be getting out of whatever it is that we're getting? And so that has definitely shaped, I think, some of our approach. It's not that I think that it stops us from doing those things, but I think it causes us to be more considerate and take the time to consider where before we'd probably just be like, oh, I got the money. Okay, we're fine. We'll go.
Yeah. It really is that pause, the thinking things through. So then even if we do decide to make that decision and it does do different debt or cause a different pinch in a different area, we've thought it through enough that we're okay with it. I could argue why I chose that and feel comfortable about my argument instead of saying, well, I don't know, it seemed really good at the time.
Yeah. It has also, as we've continued to learn about money and increased financial literacy, we've continued to shape our behaviors and we've saved a lot more. We now know what we're invested in our investments, and we have, more money to give us more of a cushion and more of that sense of safety. That certainly comes from some of our experiences earlier on. There was something else I was going to say, and I can't remember it now.
But yeah, and I think of a sense of safety and security. I remember sitting down because I didn't have that sense of security for a lot of time growing up. I remember sitting down when you're like, okay, well, I have this big chunk. Either we could do it, we could renovate this, or we could do this, or we go on these vacations, or we could pay off the house. And part of mine was we could pay off the house because if the poo-poo hits the fan, at least I don't have to worry about where I'm going to sleep. That's one less thing I have to worry about. And having that security is huge.
Yeah. You just reminded me of the thing I wanted to talk about a minute ago, which was paying off the house. A lot of people say, oh, no one regrets that.
Mm-hmm.
No one regrets paying off the house, but like that gives you that sense of freedom or whatever. I'll say this: I have a little regret.
Well, but it's different though.
Yeah,
And I could see why you and I have very different views on why on paying off the house and why I have no regret whatsoever. Like no regrets over here.
No, don't get me wrong. Like for the most part, I'm still cool with it.
Yeah.
But when I look back and the interest rate that we had and the money that we could have invested and what that money would have done, knowing that we would have been fine all along, we could have been a little bit further ahead. Now, you can't go back and change that.
Yeah.
Right? But, the if I had it to do over, I wouldn't have paid off the house. And that is like, again, that's just something that there's just a tinge of regret. It's not a ton.
Yeah.
I'm still very happy about that and get a lot of satisfaction from having the house paid off that way. But it is that sense of I want more security that comes from, I think, our earlier experience with money and seeing also and hearing some of the stories about, hey, what happens if you do mess around with debt? What happens if you don't pay off your house? What happens if you don't pay attention to where your finances are going and things like that? And all hearing those stories as it built up, financial literacy and everything like that has shaped some of those behaviors to give us more security and more confidence going forward, and also just be more mindful and intentional about how we're investing and where we're putting our money.
Yep.
That has definitely increased over the last 10 years,
Yeah.
I would say.
I agree. I have a better understanding, like the stock market, all that gives me anxiety. And so, but I know how to manage it. Like I don't pay, like I balance it now instead of going, oh my gosh, it dipped. There goes all my stuff. Understanding the cycle of it, and it goes like the index funds are usually pretty stable, up and down. Overall though, it's a very stable investment.
Right.
I didn't really understand that to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And also I don't gamble. Like I might
We are not gamblers.
I might choose to spend my money on cars, but I'm not going to just throw my money away. I'm not going to gamble. I don't like to buy lottery tickets. Like I only maybe do $1 if like there's a whole family thing going in. So to me, before understanding investments and all that, it was more of a gamble. I looked at it as a gamble because I didn't fully understand it. Now that I'm getting more knowledge and more understanding about it and how the long term plays out and like solid market like index funds and all that other things that are pretty much over a 15 whatever year thing are pretty solid, I have a better understanding about it, where in the beginning I just saw like this like up and down things, and like you lost money
and volatility,
and I didn't
potentially scared you.
Yeah. And I was more focused on wanting that feeling of security, knowing that, okay, I know how to eat like you don't have any money. I know how to figure I've lived the not having money, that I could do all that stuff.
Yep.
But I need a house.
Right.
I need somewhere to live. So if I get that checked off, I can manage all the other things. Like if something crazy happens and we don't have any money, we have a house that I can stay in where we can manage all the other things.
Right.
So that's kind of where I look at it. And I still, even understanding it, I still lean towards the security of having a house, just the leftover trauma, leftover whatever, growing up and understanding how quick that could change.
If there is one thing that your older self could tell your younger self, or as you look back through those experiences about money growing up, either an experience you would want to change or something you would tell your younger self to keep in mind that you've learned over the years?
I mean, one, I'd love to have changed my parents' financial situation. That would have been great, but that's an obvious, like, stupid answer.
Sure.
I think it would be twofold. One, don't whiplash, fix. So I went from being poor, very like thrift store shopping, very over fixated on no money, to when I started getting money, I went, oh, I'm treating myself. I went like, I'm never buying secondhand clothes. Like I went 100%, 180 away from where I was. Realizing that I didn't have to go that far. Like I could have just went like 90 degrees away from where it was and I still be fine. Two would be to not be afraid of learning about investing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that's out of reach for the average person. Because growing up, I thought it was so far. Like, I thought I had to have, like, an understanding. I had to know someone that was in the financial departments and things like that. Or I had to be, like, coming from a family that was money, that, like, okay, we did these things and all this other stuff. And it seemed like it was something that was not something that my family would be privy to.
Right. It didn't seem accessible.
No, just, yeah. And realizing that that's not how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not as overwhelming and it's not as intimidating. And little steps, little investments add up to set up.
Yeah.
So what about you?
I'll add this, is that the investment world in the 80s and 90s was a little bit different than it is here in the 2020s. So I can definitely understand why, like frankly, there was a lot of families that saw investing as inaccessible and like they just wasn't something that you did.
Yeah.
And so it's not surprising to hear you say that, like, hey, given where we're at. For me, I think the one thing I would say is to be more intentional and educate myself more about money and finance and what it means to you, and the fact that it is a resource that allows you to buy capabilities. It is a resource that allows you to buy freedom, maybe more so than I already knew. I think I always had some sense of that if I work hard and I set a goal, I can go get the money and I can get this thing. But being able to think more broadly, being able to think more about how time you can buy time. You can buy the capability of being able to do things through money, and using it as a resource that way, that is a fungible version of something for something that is not fungible in time. Like, you cannot change that, right? We all get a certain amount of time. We only have so much time, and we don't know how much that is. And so being able to say, hey, where does it make sense for me to potentially spend so that I can either maybe get some time back or that I can have a better experience with my time and make that time more valuable, more useful. I think we've applied that in some cases, and in some ways I do still also have that frugal streak too, where I will, as a part of that, I will try to maximize that investment too. So, as much as my parents were coupon clippers, I definitely am always looking for a good deal on stuff.
You still do the coupons. I mean, they're electronic now, and you just go up there. But yeah, you still pay attention to all that.
Yeah, I still use the coupons. I still, like when we were doing our Disney vacations, I would buy the gift cards from BJ's, which is, for those of you who don't have BJ's, it's like Costco. It's like Sam's Club. It's just a different version of that.
So you get a certain,
but you would get
percentage off. Yeah.
So when you bought $100 gift card, it was $96.
So, but you add up that over time.
Yes. So you're automatically saving 4% on your vacation just by using gift cards instead of using cash. So we were taking 4% right off the bat. And then we were annual pass holders, which was an investment up front, but there were a lot of discounts that we took advantage of on the back end of that we were able to get, like the Tables in Wonderland that we bought into that. We took advantage of that multiple times, and we definitely saved money in the long run between that and the annual passes. In terms of being able to have a much better experience overall. Like, yes, we're still spending money, right? But we were able to get the advantage of those discounts and have a better experience overall because we were taking advantage of the programs that they had.
Yeah.
We may cut all that out. I don't know.
That's fine.
It's kind of a little windy, but
I get windy all the time.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll cut all that out. But yeah, there is a certain amount of like, I do have some frugality, but I don't want to be so frugal as to the point where we're cutting to the bone.
Yeah.
Nor do I want it to impact our experiences. I want to make sure that we're doing frugality to make sure that we're maximizing the value that we're getting without making it a bad experience.
You do that very well.
I think I do all right with it. But I would definitely tell myself, just to kind of bring it back, I would tell myself, get financially literate.
Yeah.
to read some more books. Like, like don't ignore it. Don't be blasé about it. Like, this is really important.
Well, I wish there would have been podcasts or like YouTube channels back when we were doing this, because we didn't have, like, it's easy to go sit and throw on some, like, the content that's out there that's easy and accessible and easy to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Is a wide range of things that we did not have.
Oh, for sure. I would say that
back in my day.
Well, I think what I would say is I hope that in us doing this now, and I know we've talked about this before, but I'll say it again. In us doing this now, I hope that it has that impact on somebody else where maybe they are starting a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And they hear this and they, are able to get that message, and they're able to increase their financial literacy and help themselves earlier on. Or even if they are starting a little bit later, if they're in their 30s or 40s, that's okay.
It's okay, yeah.
If this helps them change their behaviors and helps them learn and get the confidence to go out and build their financial literacy, I'm like, hell yeah, that's awesome.
That's true. I love how, like, my hope is that they can see, like, we're just average people.
Right.
With our own hiccups and back things, but we are not in any way.
We're not CPAs. We're not accountants.
No.
We didn't go to school for finance or anything like that.
We're just average people figuring it out.
Yeah.
But so I'm thinking, if I could do this, it should be hopefully less intimidating for others. To do it.
I would certainly hope so. So every episode, we'd like to take a few moments to reflect back on the week and talk about what filled our spirit this week. Christine, what happened this week that filled our spirit? Because you know that mine is the same as yours.
The total eclipse of 2024. So we live in totality. And we were able to have the total eclipse. Like, we didn't have to go far. We just walked up the street to the park. It was exciting. My brother came into town. Mm-hmm. His friend who helped me get into astronomy. I have a telescope, and I'm kind of like a nerd, little baby nerd of astronomy. They came into town for totality, and so we got to experience that whole shebang. I don't know if you want to talk about it, because it's about the same for both of us, but it's just...
Yeah, it was an amazing experience. There was a lot of buildup, a lot of excitement leading into it. There was... we weren't sure
about the weather, because where we live, usually it's cloudy.
Yeah, it's hard to know if it's going to be cloudy or sunny, especially in a shoulder season, in April. Hard to know what the weather could be like here. And thankfully, we had an absolutely wonderful day. Very light cloud cover overall when the eclipse happened. And it was great because we went up to the park, and then other neighbors came out and other people started coming up, and you got a solar shade for your telescope. Yep. And we invited people to come over and take a look through the telescope and see what they could see.
Yeah, I think that was fun. Like, that was fun having the neighborhood, like, because our neighborhood, everyone's nice, but everyone minds their own business. You don't really do a lot of interacting. Mm-hmm. So, like, what was our neighbor said? He goes, "We're bonded now. We've been through an experience."
Yep.
So it was fun. Everyone came up, looked at the telescope. People were able to bring up their camera and take, I would help people take pictures of watching, the eclipse that happened. And just that moment, I mean, like, I can't even fully describe the moment of totality.
No, it was kind of wild. So leading up into it, an hour beforehand, you can feel it starting to get colder, and you kind of get the sense of it's starting to get darker. It's like when you have a rainstorm near sunset and it gets like that
yellow
weird orange hue. Yeah. It was a bit like that, and then it started and then it started to get colder, and you could feel the temperature dropping as things got closer and closer. And then, once we got it within, a couple minutes, you're starting to see that there's just this little sliver that's left.
Yep. And then, like, everything starts to dim. And, like, I remember you go, the house lights are turning on. Like, so it wasn't like it's not like a sunset where, like, it eases in. It was like, in my mind, the only thing is, like, the light was sucked away. Like, it was like, so, like, it got dim. And then, like, the anticipation. And then everyone got excited because it got dim. And you saw, like, 2 house lights turn on.
Yeah. And so the house lights went on, and then all of a sudden, like, it gets dark because totality hits, and we had a little thing that was telling us when totality actually hit, so we knew when we could take off our glasses safely.
Yeah.
And then you look around and it's like twilight.
Well, first, like, it gets dark and you just hear someone go, "The stars are out!"
Yeah.
Like, because you see the
and other
planets.
explicatives.
Yeah, well, yeah. But yeah, and then, like you said, like, it's twilight, but you just stand in a circle and just look around and...
Go ahead, start from there.
Yeah, so you stand in a circle and you look around and you just see the twilight that you're talking about.
Yeah, and it looks like a sunset all the way around, and then you look up and you can look at the sun and you see this. It looks like a glowing black hole.
Yeah.
Because of the way that the light is coming from around the sun, but you can look up at it and you can see it
Without glasses, yeah, we saw the flare or that came down.
Yep.
And then was it Bailey's beads, the little bubbles, because where the craters of the moon light kind of comes out around it.
Yep.
That's Bailey's
beads. Yep.
And then the diamond ring.
Yep. Which is a very big version of Bailey's beads, because
Yes.
it's the light starting to peer through the gaps in the mountains of the moon.
Yep.
As it's finishing its pass through totality right before the sun emerges on the moon gets out of the way and the sun emerges on the other side.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that was cool. And then we were like looking around, like, okay, like animals or whatnot. What did you see? I mean, first when it happened, like the amount of people cheering and like people that just couldn't like contain themselves, I was impressed. I didn't actually say a swear word. I said, "Oh, holy crap!"
Yep.
But like you heard the whole neighborhoods, like people that
Yeah.
even weren't out at the park. You heard people like cheering and stuff. Like they're cheering like Mother Nature, or they're cheering like astronomical events, like they would cheer a sports team.
right, and it was cool to have that experience kind of carry that weight in that same way, and people get excited about that as an experience that they're going to have potentially just once in their lifetime.
Yeah.
It was really cool, and it was nice to be able to share that experience with your brother and his friend, and
The neighborhood.
and the neighborhood as a whole. Was just really fantastic, and so would highly recommend for anybody, if you ever have an opportunity to go to totality, because we've seen other eclipses that have been
yes.
partials, and those were very cool in terms of the experience. We really enjoyed those, but this, like when people say that it's different, they're not kidding.
It's different in so many ways that you can't even fully, like, I'm thinking about when we're looking at the end when the sun's coming back out from, well, the moon's moving away, so the sunlight's coming back out. Like there was these flocks of seagulls squawking heading back to the lake, and we're just like, I've never seen a flock, like, I mean, I've heard a flock of seagulls, but I've never seen that. Like they're all like, oh wait, nope, not bedtime yet, let's go back. Like it was things that don't normally happen were happening, and it was just a weird
wild
experience, and it was just so, you can't fully explain it.
Yeah.
That's all we have for this week. What do we have on deck for next?
Yeah, next week we're going to be talking about getting ready for our seasonal hobbies, starting to get things out, starting to check all of our gear and everything like that. Make sure that we're ready to go for their seasonal hobbies, and maybe even talk a little bit about spring cleaning and how that can be something that impacts your finances, or helps you declutter your life a little bit, things like that. Bring a little bit more joy to your life. So join us for that conversation, and in the meantime, we hope you live a spirited life. The topics and information on A Spirited Life should not be taken as financial advice and should be considered for entertainment purposes only.